Hey, what's up? So today we're gonna look at something kind of serious. Okay, so over the weekend, Trump was deporting migrants. I'm going off the top of my head for this story, but he was deporting migrants. A judge ruled that it was illegal, so he had to turn back the planes. He didn't. They ended up going to El Salvador, and from what I could tell, they were thrown in the El Salvadorian prison CCOT, which we'll get into that. But just to recap everything, I want to watch this because this brought my attention to that story. Okay, so I'll talk a lot about my sources in this video, I think, where I pulled my information from, but one of those sources is Philip DeFranco. I like Phil. I've been watching him since like 2017, 2016. I don't agree with him on everything, and he frustrates me at times, but I think he does a pretty good job at like distilling information, just giving like basic facts of the story, and relaying it in like a very concise manner. So I appreciate that appreciate that he does that. So let's just watch this recap.
Then, next up today, we need to talk about the Trump administration deporting hundreds of people despite a judge ordering the removals to be stopped, with there arguably being just enough gray area that it can deny being an open defiance of the order, even as officials claim that the judge doesn't have the authority in the first place. With that, this all goes back to Trump invoking something called the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, a law that allows the government to deport certain nationals in times of war without trial, and it's a law that has until now only been used 3 times in the country's history: the War of 1812, World War I, and World War II, when it was employed to justify the internment of people of German, Italian, and most of everyone who was of Japanese descent. And in this,
I'm putting it at 1.25.
this case, it's being invoked to order the deportations of alleged members of the Venezuelan gang Tren De Agua, or with the U.S. formally designating it and 7 other Latin American criminal groups as foreign terrorist organizations last month, which in itself has been described as unusual because the terrorist designation is normally reserved for groups that use violence for political ends, right? Not those that are aimed at making money. Regardless, the White House is making it official that it sees itself as war with these groups, with a proclamation announcing the invocation of the Alien Enemies Act, claiming evidence irrefutably demonstrates that TDA has invaded the United States and continues to invade, attempt to invade, and threaten to invade the country, perpetrated irregular warfare within the country, and used drug trafficking as a weapon against our citizens. Though with that, you've also had many saying the evidence is in fact very refutable, saying the characterization of migrant criminal activity as an invasion or the claim is at best misleading, and by extension, the idea that Trump could claim wartime powers is ridiculous. And so with that, you had groups suing the government, and on Saturday, you had a U.S. district judge issuing an order temporarily blocking the deportation, noting there that the law has never been used outside of a congressionally declared war, and that plaintiffs may successfully argue Trump exceeded his legal authority in invoking it. But at that point, 2 planes reportedly carrying 261 deportees had already taken off, with 137 of them reportedly being deported on the basis of the Alien Enemies Act. And this is the basis on which the other deportees were removed remains unclear as of recording. Although notably, according to a review of the flight records by the Washington Post, a 3rd flight reportedly left shortly after the written order was issued, with Axios also reporting that the administration had made a concerted effort to fast-track the deportation so that they took place before a judge would have a chance to block them, saying that Trump signed the order invoking the Alien Enemies Act on Friday night, but intentionally did not advertise it. And on Saturday morning, when word of the order leaked, there was a mad scramble to get planes in the air. But in any case, with all that, the judge gave a verbal order for the flights to turn back. But notably, according to some, that directive did not make its way into his official written ruling. So they just kept flying, arriving in El Salvador in the middle of the night, with the Salvadoran president Nayib Bukele announcing their arrival and claiming that there were 238 members of the Tren De Agua and 23 members of the Salvadoran gang MS-13. And with that, sharing a video of that there were 238 members of the Tren De Agua and 23 members of the Salvadoran gang MS-13.
Okay, so yeah, I'll just let
With that, sharing a video of shackled men being dragged off the plane, struggling to walk as officers push their heads down and loaded into vehicles to be taken to a prison. Once there, being forced to kneel, having their heads shaved, and being shoved into cells. With Bukele adding that they and future deportees would join the 40,000 inmates at the country's so-called terrorism confinement center and would be engaged in various workshops and labor under the Zero Idleness program, something he said would help make the country's prison system self-sustainable. And of course, with all of this, it's been celebrated by those in the Trump camp.
This was tripping me out when I saw this, because if it's true that those 238 guys were Tren de Agua, they're Venezuelan. What the fuck are they doing in El Salvador? Like, dog, what?
With Elon Musk simply responding, much appreciated.
And I know Trump and Rubio were saying like back in February that we were going to do that, but I think since Trump has been in office, he's been saying so much stuff, and I've been like debating on whether to believe him or not. But I think this is like, dude, he's actually, everything he says, he pretty much means. Now, whether we're going to invade Canada or not, or Greenland, that remains to be seen, but it's not out of the cards. And he's been saying that. So this is so mind-boggling. Like, the fuck, dude? Like, yes, they're not U.S. citizens, but that doesn't mean we can send them to any fucking country we want, especially a country that's run by a fucking dictator, and the habeas corpus pretty much isn't allowed. We'll get into that, but
Marco Rubio thanking the Salvadoran president for his assistance and friendship, and Donald Trump himself also expressing his gratitude on social media. Right, with all this, you have the videos and other images going around online. It's being celebrated by some, horrifying many others. That in part because here's the huge, big, massive thing to keep in mind here. As of recording this video, the Trump administration has not identified the immigrants deported, and it also hasn't provided any evidence that they are in fact gang members or have committed any crimes in the U.S. at all. And in general,
yeah, that's true. Even if they're not gang members, they're just illegal, and we throw them in fucking El Salvador, that prison, that's so fucked, dude. It's unbelievably fucked. It's like, I don't even have the words for it, bro.
Based on the fact that the Alien Enemies Act was invoked, there's no indication that these deportees received any sort of due process. And
like, their lives are in danger. Like, they essentially got fucking disappeared into another country.
On that note, several relatives of men believed to be among their deportees are already claiming their loved ones do not have gang ties, which may not be surprising since we know for sure that ICE raids have swept up tons of people with no criminal record. With all that, the fear is that Trump could simply declare anyone a gang member and remove them from the country. With, for example, Adam Isaacson of the Washington Office for Latin America, which is a human rights group, warning on X, basically any Venezuelan citizen in the U.S. may be removed on pretext of belonging to Tren De Agua with no chance at defense. And then, of course, on top of that, there's the whole issue of seemingly ignoring the order of a federal judge, with people like a professor at the Georgetown University Law Center claiming that even if the judge's verbal directive to turn around the planes was not technically part of his final order, the Trump administration clearly violated the spirit of it, and adding, this just incentivizes future courts to be hyper-specific in their orders and not give the government any wiggle room. And with that, another law professor, this one from NYU, said, now that Congress has shown itself subservient to the wishes of the White House, the judiciary is the last check against the exercise of autocratic power in the president. And adding, the question before the country is whether the judges will use their contempt and other powers to resist the elimination of checks and balances in order to protect the rule of law. And finally here, you had Patrick Eddington, a Homeland Security and Civil Liberties legal expert at the Cato Institute, which is a libertarian think tank, claiming that the White House was in open defiance of the judge, and adding, this is beyond the pale and certainly unprecedented, with them also reportedly calling it the most radical test of America's system of checks and balances since the Civil War. Now, with all that, as far as the administration's response, Trump himself defended the deportations while sidestepping questions about its legality, saying, I don't know, you have to speak to the lawyers about that, and adding, I can tell you this, these were bad people. But then this also, as you had White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt claiming the judge lacked the authority, saying, a single judge in a single city cannot direct the movements of an aircraft full of foreign alien terrorists who were physically expelled from U.S. soil, and adding, the administration did not refuse to comply with a court order. The order, which had no lawful basis, was issued after terrorist TDA aliens had already been removed from U.S. territory. But with that, in a court filing on Sunday, the DOJ did reportedly say it wouldn't respect the judge's order, with two senior Trump officials reportedly telling NBC News they expect the legal battle to ultimately head to the Supreme Court, where they believe that the administration will win. But on that note, right, with all that said and out of the way, here's the thing. This is not the only deportation that went ahead this weekend despite a judge saying no. Right, so meet Dr. Rasha Alawieh. She is a Lebanese citizen. She is a professor at Brown.
Okay. I'll stop there with Phil. So yeah, just to recap, Tren De Agua, Venezuelan. What are they doing in El Salvador? To me, it feels like, and Phil even said it, that they're just using Tren De Agua to, they're just using that as a label as for all Venezuelan migrants. Whether that's true or not remains to be seen, but that's what it feels like, at least right now. Okay. So I'm gonna be real, I didn't hear of Tren De Agua till last year when they were talking about the Colorado apartment shit that happened or went down. Still not 100% sure what happened there. I do know a little bit about like Latin American gangs, like the cartels in Mexico, some of the cartels in Colombia, a little bit of Ecuador. I just know a little bit about that. And when it comes to like U.S. crime, I know a little bit about like the Bloods, Crips. I know of the Mexican Mafia. I don't know exactly what they do. I think they're more of a prison gang. They have ties to some of the cartels, I think. I'm not 100% sure. I'll talk a little bit more about my sources and what I know, and we'll get there. But Task and Purpose, he's a military guy. He made a video on Tren De Agua. I haven't seen it yet. Let's watch it because, like I said, they really blew up last year. I read their Wikipedia page. It's not that long. I'll show it in a bit. But Tren De Agua, compared to MS-13 or Barrio 18. And so in the report, they said they had some MS-13 members. I feel like it doesn't compare, but from what that, I don't know a lot about them, so maybe I'm wrong, but MS-13's pretty fucked. I'll go into their history and stuff now. Or I'll go into a little bit more of their history later, but let's just watch this video for now.
What started as a Venezuelan prison gang is now fast spreading across the United States.
It is an infestation. It's taking hold, not just in Colorado or New York. It's up in Michigan, Florida, Texas, you name it.
They've expanded through tactics of extreme violence and trafficking everything from guns to people. You might already be familiar with them because a video clip of the gang went viral recently. They made national headlines for terrorizing an apartment complex in the state of Colorado. Take a look at this insane security footage showing armed men casually walking around like they own the place. We see them going from door to door, and according to an independent investigation from a Denver law firm, they were demanding protection money, basically extra rent paid directly to them, and they're stabbing residents who refuse to pay up. The reason why I think this footage was so shocking to so many people is because the criminals look like they're going for a stroll without a care in the world. The question on everyone's mind, or at least mine, is how are they operating with this kind of impunity? It suggests that these guys are comfortable and don't have any real fear of repercussion from law enforcement. So who is this new gang?
Tren De Agua.
Tren De Agua. Tren De Agua. Tren De Agua.
Tren De Agua.
Now I know this topic has become widely politicized, but I assure you it's not my goal to sway you one way or the other on it. I worked closely with a South American researcher to make sure that we got all of the facts and cultural idiosyncrasies about this case correct. I'm simply going to be consolidating all the information here for you.
I do like Task and Purpose. There was one clip I saw of him though. I'll pull it up later, but he was talking about Gladio. If you don't know what Gladio is, it's kind of a conspiracy theory. It's like somewhat confirmed, somewhat not confirmed, but some or elements of it are confirmed. But basically, in the 50s, the U.S. set up like stay-behind networks in case the Soviets invaded, and he was talking about that, and he was like, you know what, I kind of support that. But those stay-behind networks, if they are real, are accused of doing some pretty heinous shit, and even the guy who was like, wait a minute, I'll pull up the clip later, like I said, but the guy he was talking to, he was like, wait, they did some fucked up shit. You're cool with that? And Chris was like, yeah, why not? Why are they like even talking about it? They should keep quiet still. And I was like, whoa, like, dog, they murdered people and probably blew some shit up. Like, what? Yeah.
This is everything you need to know about the TDA gang and authorities' attempts to bring them to justice. So the origins of Tren De Agua are widely disputed, but one theory is that they started in Venezuela around 2005 as this small group of workers who got jobs at a railway union, but the union never ended up progressing into the construction phase. So instead, they started going around pulling off crimes together, idle hands of the devil's playground and all that. I believe this theory to be the most credible and obvious because their name literally translates to Aragua train.
Oh, that actually kind of does make sense. I was reading this Wikipedia last night. I kind of skimmed it. I didn't read all of it, but when it comes to Venezuela, organized crime kind of stems from Hugo Chavez's revolution there. I know a little bit about Venezuelan history. I'm not an expert in any way, but according to the wiki, could be wrong, I don't know, but a lot of the crime kind of stems from Hugo Chavez and his rise to power and his leniency of it because it was coming from the poor and they were exploited by the rich. It just kind of got worse, and then after he died, shit just got fucked. So, and then the organized crime comes from like the gangs and comes from like prison gangs, which kind of how most organized crime starts, I guess, or at least in South America.
Things really kicked off, though, when some of the members were thrown into an overcrowded prison. Venezuelan authorities who were in charge of that facility then handed over the keys to the prisoners themselves to run it instead. Through a series of neglect, cowardice, and good old-fashioned corruption, they pushed the responsibility onto the prisoners. A few years later, things really had gotten wildly out of hand because according to Inside Crime, who's been closely monitoring the group, by 2018, the gang had over 2,000 members and was growing fast. When the Venezuelan National Guard were later ordered to retake control of the prisons, what they found, I think, it shocked me. One of the prisons had a zoo, a playground, a swimming pool, a nightclub, and a restaurant and a bar. They had
not to be dramatic, but like that's kind of the case with like a lot of gang-run prisons. Like, I know in Guatemala, not too long ago, they found some shit like that. But going back to like Pablo Escobar, like his prison that he had, it had shit like that. Like, it's not that shocking. There's a lot of crime in Latin America, and I'm not saying that's like they're inherently like that. It's just the political and the economic situation there. It just creates opportunities for shitbags to be shitbags, essentially.
Underground tunnels that allowed the leadership to come and go out of the prison as they pleased. Rana Rosique is a Venezuelan journalist who specializes in security issues there, and she said the prison was a kind of small town.
Also, I'm Mexican and Native American. Never been to Mexico, though, and I'm pretty whitewashed, so yeah.
Or city, where they were a kind of mayor or rulers who controlled everything. They turned the prison into a kind of bunker and turned it into a kind of city. Meet Guerrero. He's the top leader, top dog of Tren De Agua. This guy's origin story legitimately reads like something out of a supervillain comic book. Hector Guerrero Flores is 40 years old. He was born in 1983 in the city of Maracay, which is the capital of the state of Aragua in Venezuela. In the year 2000, he broke his crime cherry with some robberies, and then in 2005, he graduated to murder by attacking a police station and killing Corporal Oswald Gonzalez there. 5 years later, he was captured for selling illicit substances. This is where he was put into the Aragua Penitentiary Center. At this time, his TDA gang was still small, according to the BBC, but under his leadership, it exploded in membership. He escaped and was caught again when rumors claimed that Venezuelan President Maduro even requested his help in suppressing protests, although that might have just been a rumor that he wanted to facilitate himself. General Oscar Aurelio, director of investigations for the Peruvian...
It could be true. From going back to the wiki, collectivos, I think they were called. Yeah, they were armed wings of the Bolivian Revolution. They were kind of like a paramilitary. They were like a left-wing paramilitary force. So when like anti-regime or anti-government protests started, they would clamp down on them, and they would use the collectivos to like harass and even murder protesters. So I don't know if he was a collectivo, that the leader, but it wouldn't be like far-fetched if he was like somewhat political or claimed to be a collectivo.
It sounds like these guys had it 10 times better than me with their zoos and arsenal of weaponry, so why in the world would they ever want to leave? It all ties back to the collapse of Venezuela, and I'll power through this part quickly as a recap if you're not aware, but during the early 2000s, oil prices were booming, shooting up to the moon, $18 per barrel to $140 a barrel. But when prices took a nosedive starting in 2008, Venezuela's economy absolutely tanked. They resorted to printing money, which caused massive inflation. To really condense this all, they had nasty food shortages, people were broke, hungry, and this triggered mass migration starting in 2012, and by 2018 had led to 3 million Venezuelans leaving their country. Now, the TDA gang saw decreased revenue during this time, and so it's when they started to leave for new markets by expanding throughout Latin America and the United States. And here's where I'll say, I personally feel like the mainstream media fails to cover this topic in any way or do it justice. That does, at least in any way that doesn't incite division. Because there are thousands of Venezuelan people out there who hate Tren De Agua. They hate them because they give them a bad name. I don't think it's racist for me to say that this gang needs to be stopped. But on the other hand, there's also complete denial by some in the media that this is even happening at all, because Nuance has been dead most of my adult life. The reason this is concerning is because we've seen what happens.
I agree to a certain point, but let's see where this video goes.
Happens when gangs are allowed to grow unchecked in places like Mexico, El Salvador, and Ecuador that are dealing with this same problem today.
TDA is characterized as MS-13 on steroids.
That's crazy, because MS-13 did some crazy shit, and they're still doing crazy shit. So I have yet to see. I saw a report where they robbed a jewelry store and they like hit 2 women, and that's not good at all. Those guys should be fucking thrown in jail, rot in there. But I haven't heard anything like any massacres or like brutal murders they've done. At least not yet. At least not in America. Maybe in South America or Central America, they've done some crazier shit. And I could kind of see that because they have spread around South America, like he showed. And just from other stuff I've seen. And if they have done that, especially in South America, because opportunities there are, because like corruption's like so rampant in those countries, they're probably able to like get in there and like do their thing. But in the US, I just haven't seen any evidence that they've done anything crazy.
Enforcement agencies are finally starting to fight back now. In October 2024, Texas officials raided an apartment complex in San Antonio, arresting 20 members of Tren De Agua's gang. They had actually taken control of a vacant apartment building. This appears to be their preferred MO, right? That I've seen where they'll come in, they'll take over a hotel or an apartment with fear and violence, and then they run narcotics and trafficking operations out of it until they get rolled up by law enforcement.
So Tren De Agua probably started coming in a little over 3 years ago. We started seeing some trends and some information that they were entering the United States. And they've pretty much gone to every major city that we have in the U.S. at this time and started to set up their networks. And the level of their violence, especially with extortion and assaults, is a lot higher than some of these other gangs has been as well. A lot of these gangs try to stay under the radar from law enforcement. Tren De Agua, El Tren, does not seem to be wanting to do that. They don't care that law enforcement knows that they're around. And in fact, the head of Tren De Agua recently released a green light on police officers to allow its gang members to shoot at police officers. So that's something that would not normally happen.
So it's believed TDA first started appearing.
He said extortion and assaults, but I'm not hearing any like murders or anything. And I'm not saying that has to be the level. Like, I'm okay with law enforcement going after these guys, but to say they're worse than MS-13 or any of the cartels, like, dude, what? And if that's the case, we threw these guys in a fucking black site essentially in El Salvador.
In American cities in Chicago in 2023. And then just a year later, they were already linked to the murder of a Florida police officer.
Okay, so
a 22-year-old
yeah, I forgot about that. Lincoln Riley. Okay.
Student from Georgia. And that's what sets them apart. They are brazen. They're taking out police officers when other gangs try to lay low. From there, we began seeing the gang's influence
So we got 2 murders under the belt.
crop up in multiple states. It was clear that this wasn't an isolated problem. It was spreading. I should tell you that after the apartment incident in Aurora, Colorado, it got very controversial. The police department and the mayor later put out a statement that this was just an isolated incident. Residents from the building also held a press conference saying that they've never seen Tren De Agua around and they aren't scared of them. Meanwhile, interviews with other citizens who live there say the exact opposite. Either way, I still think that it's worth investigating gangs deeper, because an FBI threat assessment found that criminal gangs commit as much as 80% of the crime in many communities. FBI agent John Morales warned that TDA was operating in all 5 of New York City's boroughs where they recruited from people staying in migrant shelters. Morales said the main concern that the FBI has right now is that TDA will start to form an alliance with other gangs like MS-13 and other pre-existing gangs in order to spread drugs more effectively and to make more of a profit. NYPD put out a bulletin stating Tren De Agua's newly established presence in New York City may incite further gang-related violence, including stabbings, assaults, robberies, raising public safety concerns, end quote. An incident went viral and gained national attention. I remember when this happened, 2 NYPD officers were attacked, brutally beaten, and kicked. They were responding to a call of disorderly conduct in Times Square. They tried to de-escalate the scene, but were attacked by roughly 14 members of the TDA gang. The thing that frustrates me the most is that I actually can't even show you the video clip showing the violence that the gang did to these cops, so you can actually feel what happened. Because YouTube, I saw they would take it down and demonetize it, even though all of the news channels are able to show it. Fortunately, I'm now on Pepperbox TV, where you can see this episode with that video uncensored, along with exclusive Pepperbox TV videos that I'm creating there, analyzing combat footage. I put the link in the description if you're interested in that. So ultimately, 7 of the attackers were arrested, but it gets even worse, because they were all released instantly without bail. And this is, of course, this caused even more shock from the public, who questioned why the gang members were not immediately deported. A familiar pattern has emerged here. In one particularly terrible attack, a TDA gang member on a moped dragged a 62-year-old woman down a street in Brooklyn. Their MO is that, to snatch your phone or your purse right out of your hand, and then they drain your entire bank account of any funds by using fake transactions on your phone to the United States and South America. Then they send your phone off to Colombia to be resold. I'll tell you some instances of those violent attacks now. A 33-year-old man who made the mistake of working with the gang was abducted alongside his 2 kids in Texas. They put a single bullet into the back of his head, execution style, and then they dumped his body on the side of the road. Once their initial cells were established in the States, they muscled their way into local criminal economies. How? They would send a message to anyone who got in their way. Their favorite method was their trademark move, delivering a rival gang member's dismembered body inside trash bags to the competition's doorstep. Also, 2 NYPD officers were shot by TDA gang members in Queens, New York.
2 NYPD officers.
One of them only survived because his bulletproof vest stopped the shot. So the way TDA is breaking into these drug markets is by being more violent than the rest. Like how a business needs to somehow differentiate themselves from the competition, that differentiating factor for TDA is that they attempt to be more ruthless than everyone else. They tied up an innocent woman and then threatened to cut off her fingers. They pistol whipped her and stole $75,000 in jewelry from her.
That was that jewelry thing.
All later rounded up and arrested. Here is where it gets a little bit murky though. On the one hand, organizations like the think tank Inside Crime, which back in April 2024 claimed that the group appears to have no substantial U.S. presence and that information about the presence of Tren De Agua in the United States is limited and vague, but just 5 months later, officials from Texas, Chicago, Ohio, Colorado, and Florida say that they're seeing the complete opposite. In fact, the U.S. Department of Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control.
Okay, these guys are bad. I'm not trying to discredit that or like saying they're not, but again, we're sending them to black sites, even if they even are Tren De Agua. That's crazy. But also too, it seems like law enforcement knows these guys are around. They're starting to clamp down on them. It was starting to become a problem, but now that they were aware that it seems like they were a burgeoning problem, and then law enforcement noticed, and now they're on top of them. But like, I'm not seeing how they were worse than MS-13 or even Barrio.
Which moves
or even like US based gangs. I don't know.
Quicker than the TDA, recently classified them as a transnational criminal organization. They state on their website that the gang is expanding throughout the Western Hemisphere and engaging in diverse criminal activities, posing a threat to American communities and abusing the U.S. financial system.
Okay. I feel like I'd have to look into more what MS-13 and Barrio did in the U.S., like especially during the 90s, but I feel like they're worse. Like crime in the 90s was pretty bad. That being said, I don't mind that law enforcement's like clamping down on these guys. Okay, so we're gonna look at El Salvador.
No entiendo por qué los trasladaron allá con tatuajes, sin tatuajes, con récord.
I don't understand why they took them there with or without tattoos, with or without criminal record.
We do not think the Alien Enemies Act can be used at all. It cannot be used during peacetime.
The White House facing...
Yeah, that's the thing too. I saw that act can only apply to a country that we're at war with. Unless he's trying to say we're at war with Venezuela. But
major legal fallout. President Trump invoking a rare wartime authority known as the Alien Enemies Act. Just after midnight on March 16th, the first flight lands in El Salvador. The alleged members of Tren De Agua transferred from U.S. custody into El Salvador's notorious terrorism confinement center and under the jurisdiction of President Nayib Bukele, who is known for imposing a state of emergency that suspended civil and constitutional liberties. Bukele joking on social media that the judge's orders came too late.
fuck this guy, bro. And from what I could tell, last I saw, I think like how many, maybe 100 people died in CCOT so far. Let me double check that. At least 261 people have died in El Salvador's prisons under anti-gang crackdown, rights group says. The human rights organization Crisel said Wednesday that at least 261 people have died in prisons in El Salvador during President Nayib Bukele's 2.5-year crackdown on street gangs. Under a state of emergency originally declared in 2022 and still in effect, Bukele's government has rounded up 81,110 suspect gang members in sweeps that rights groups are often arbitrary based on a person's appearance or where they live. The government has had to release about 7,000 people because of a lack of evidence. The group said in a report as of April 15th, 88 of the 261 deaths may have been the result of a criminal act, though it did not specify what those acts may have been. The report said 87 of the deaths were due to illness, 14 were apparently acts of violence, and no cause could be immediately identified for the other 72. People have died in El Salvador's prisons and jails because of torture, a lack of food, unhealthy conditions, and an inhuman lack of attention, and cruel and inhuman and degrading treatment, said lawyer Zaire Navas, who authored the report. There is a deliberate policy of not protecting the rights of incarcerated people. There's no immediate reaction from the government to the report. While the government is accused of committing mass human rights abuses in the crackdown, Bukele remains highly popular in El Salvador because of homicide rates sharply dipped following the detentions. The Central American nation went from being one of the most dangerous countries in the world to having the lowest homicide rate in the region. Bukele rode that popularity into election in February, despite the country's constitution prohibiting second terms for presidents. In April, a report by the rights organization Humanitarian Legal Relief estimated at least 241 people have died in El Salvadorian prisons since the start of the crackdown. Okay, so there's another report. What to know about El Salvador's mega prison after Trump sent hundreds of immigrants there. The arrival of the immigrants alleged by the U.S. to be members of Venezuelan Tren De Agua took place under an agreement for which the Trump administration will pay the government of President Nayib Bukele $6 million for 1 year of services. Bukele has made the Central American country's stark, harsh prisons a trademark of his fight against crime. In 2023, he opened the Terrorism Confinement Center, or CCOT, where the immigrants were sent over the weekend, even as a federal judge issued a temporary order barring deportations under an 18th century wartime declaration targeting Venezuelan gangs.
Giovanna Sanchez believes her husband is one of the hundreds of Venezuelan men who were on the plane deported under the Alien Enemies Act. 26-year-old Jose Franco Caraballo Tiapa has a pending asylum case in the U.S. and was picked up at a routine check-in with Immigration Customs Enforcement in Dallas. ABC News reached out to ICE for comment about Caraballo and did not receive a response. March 19th.
Bro, they're just going after fucking everybody. That's... like, if your legal status isn't even in question, it doesn't matter. Like, they're gonna round you up, bro. Fuck.
The judge giving the administration one more day to provide more evidence about the migrants on these planes and the timing of the flights. Some predicting this case, like many others, will end up on the doorstep of the Supreme Court, leaving many families in limbo.
If you don't know much about CCOT, there's a lot of... low-key, I think the Salvadorian, like, State Department or whatever you call it, they are doing, like, I guess they have, like, a program where they have, like, YouTubers come in and, like, tour the prison. Because a lot of people have done it the past, like, 2 years. So there's plenty of documentaries you could, like, look. It's very sanitized, but just their conditions alone, like, bro, they're living like we're right on top of each other. And just the entire way that he rounded up these guys. If you don't know anything about, like, Operation Condor in South America, it's very reminiscent of that. I'm sounding like a conspiracy theorist, but
In 2000,
in, like, the 70s and 80s, mainly after, like, the coups in Chile and Argentina, a lot of the South American cone countries, essentially, they're all, like, dictatorships at that point. So they all, like, formed an alliance to combat, essentially, like, Marxism, socialism, a lot of the leftist guerrilla groups that were happening around that time. But they essentially went after anyone who was, like, left-leaning and killed a lot of people in that time.
In July 2021, following years of ongoing prosecutions, an Italian court sentenced 14 men for their role in a program known as Operation Condor, an expansive U.S.-backed campaign of surveillance, detention, torture, and assassination carried out by right-wing Latin American regimes in the 1970s. This is how it happened. Operation Condor was born in the 1970s. The Cuban Revolution coincided with a number of independence and anti-colonial movements across the global south. In Latin America, this energy was met with a series of right-wing military coups across the continent for over a decade. In 1964 in Brazil, in 1971 in Bolivia, in Chile and Uruguay in 1973, and in Argentina in 1976. The new regimes were ruthless, subjecting their opposition to measures like targeted arrests, imprisonment, torture, kidnappings, rape, and murder. Trade unions, students, artists, and anyone suspected of being left-leaning or with Marxist sympathies were targeted.
Yeah, the body count of all this is, like, stupidly high. But just the way Bukele, like I said, the way Bukele went about his declaration of emergency, and just the way he rounded up gang members, it echoes Operation Condor. And I'm not saying like US is behind it or anything, but just like the same tactics and the same methods used during this are being used now, and like that's always going to be the case. But it's interesting to look at that and just to know the history of it, and it's really concerning because I think for sure people are being tortured in there. They're not being executed, or like they're not being like, it's not a death camp, but it's still problematic, and they're still being held there. Well, like they have no right to like any trial or any like, they're not being seen before a judge. I get it. It's El Salvador. The country's super corrupt and it's had problems over the decades, but these people deserve a right to see a judge and to have a trial, you know? Like this is America. We believe in rule of law, and the fact that we're contributing to these people being sent basically to a black site. Like ever since Trump has been in office, we're just accelerating towards like fascism essentially. And the fact that this has happened so blatantly, and he told us he was going to do this and he fucking did it. It's insanely scary, dude. Like, I'm not scared they're going to come after me, but just like if your legal status is in any shape or form, like not certain, like you're not a legal citizen, like just the way they went after the Palestinian guy, like, bro, this is, and like we saw a glimpse of this in the first Trump presidency, like when the protests were happening in Portland, and those I think it was Border Patrol or Homeland Security, one of the two, they went and started like rounding up the protesters. Like we saw what he was capable of and like what he's willing to do, and now he's doing it. It's just it's insane. And when it comes to El Salvador, like I get why Bukele's popular. I'll save my thoughts on like Bukele and his rise to power for another time, but like he, in a way, he cleaned up the country, but these people, they're stuck in limbo and they're slowly dying in there. Also, him and Trump had beef, bro. like not too long ago. Okay, I think that's it for now. Let me just show the task and purpose clip.
Really, do these groups still exist throughout Europe?
I hope so.
Are they executed? Wait, why is that?
Because they're out there doing what, you know, like I said, like what I'm not willing to do.
Which is
get caught for bombing 85 civilians on a train.
to commit a false flag operation?
Yeah, like I'm not down for false flag operations.
You're not?
Not in
But you're glad that someone's doing it?
Yes, I'm glad that someone will take that route.
Are you sure you want this on the record?
Yeah, that's crazy. Like you even joking about that. Like, come on, bro. They killed civilians. Like, dog, what are we? I know. I think this was 5 years ago. I think Chris has become a little bit more, not left leaning, but a little bit more like open to like leftist ideas or leftist point of views, I guess. One more guy I do watch a lot, not because I fucking agree with him, but it's a channel called Ironclad. It's like fucking special operations guys, like it's like special ops community. It's like along the lines of that one fucking dude, that Navy SEAL. Oh, I'm blanking on his name. Not Chapo. I'm blanking on his name. He was on Joe Rogan though, I think. No. Yes, I forgot. He looks like a thumb. He's just these guys are along that. This guy is a podcast called Borderlands. It talks about the podcast, or it talks about the talks about like immigration and everything. he's talking about Tren De Agua and like all the situation, basically like, everything to do with like South America or Latin America. I'll talk about him more in depth some other time, but it's an interesting listen. So I think that's about all I wanted to cover today. I'll keep an eye on this story. Obviously, like everyone's keeping an eye on the story, but yeah, just I'll keep an eye on like what's happening with all this because this is insane. All right, I think that's it. Thanks for watching.